welcome to TP 201 Transfer Pricing for Tangibles. We've been talking about the cup and wanted to walk through a simple example of a cup transaction and basically talk about why the cup is sometimes a better method to be applying than some of the other methods that might be suggested. So as we look at this comparable uncontrolled price method, let's talk about the following case. The parent is a complex entity, meaning it probably owns intangibles and has non-routine profits. But what we're dealing with is a fairly simple transaction that they're buying raw materials from a third party and then selling them on to their manufacturing subsidiary. And the parent marks up the price paid to the third party by a small, modest amount before it passes it on to the manufacturer. And as the manufacturer uses those materials along with lots of other materials to produce a product that they're selling in the marketplace. Now, given this kind of a fact pattern, what are our options? The affiliated manufacturer is obviously the simpler entity, but testing the comparable profits with the comparable profits method, something that we've covered in other trainings, ignores this really good potential cup, the fact that the parent bought the product directly from a third party. Now, it's not a perfect cup because the parent added some value through the whole procurement function that the subsidiary would have had to do if it were out there buying all of this product on its own. So the amount that they paid for the product would be the lowest possible arm's length price that would be reasonable because that was the price they purchased at in the marketplace. But we can't probably, in all likelihood, test the parent's total profitability because it's too complex, and we aren't going to be able to find good benchmarks for a complex entity that probably owns intangibles or other such factors. Now, the reason why this can become important is that what's the alternative? If the alternative that we're considering is testing the other side of the transaction, the manufacturer, with a CPM, we'd be looking at the profitability of an entity where the product, the input that we're need to test, only forms a small portion of their total costs. And the problem here is that you could have a situation in which if they were of low profitability, the suggested adjustment might leave the parent with a negative spread on the property that it bought from the third-party supplier and passed on to the manufacturer. And I said that kind of quickly, so let's walk through this as an example. Because we're really looking at how can we defend this price charged here. The price of the transferred product is showing up in the manufacturer's COGS, and here we've sort of outlined what a parent's segmented P&L for that product would look like. That's not the parent's total P&L because remember it's a complex entity and it's doing all sorts of other things. So suppose the parent bought $1 million worth of product and has operating expenses associated with that procurement of about $10,000. Using the $1 million as a cup alone, that's a pretty good price. If you could make the adjustment to add on the extra $10,000, that would create a transfer price of $1,010,000, which again is pretty small percentage deviation from the original price. So that's another really good estimate of what the market price might be. Even if you gave the parent a 10% markup on those operating expenses, saying, had they been hired as a service provider, they would have earned a return on it. Even then, we're talking about $1 million, $11,000. So we're talking about three different numbers that are all very close to each other, approaching this from the concept that the amount they paid the third party is a pretty good cup. So given that as a base, if we had done a CPM of the manufacturer, again, we might get this odd result because if the manufacturer is below the arm's length range in profitability, the suggested price reduction in the transfer price of the transferred goods to get them into the range might result in a payment for that input that's actually less than what the parent originally paid for the product. I think it's going to be easiest to see this if we put some numbers up. So imagine now that we're looking at the P&L of the manufacturer, and up at the top the manufacturer has a revenue line of 20 million, and it has COGS that it needs to produce that 20 million. And we've used the number, the 1,010,000 from the parent. That's that product that they bought from the third party and added 10,000 to it. And then they have 17 million in expenses from third parties, the other inputs that they need or their own labor force, etc. That produces a gross profit of 1,990,000 let's insert that they have operating expenses of $1.5 million, leaving them with an operating profit of $490,000. Now that's equivalent to a margin, an operating margin of about I think it's actually rounding there, 2.5%. Okay, but what if the lower bound of the range for this manufacturer was a 4% operating margin? If that's the case, then the operating profit, 4% times the revenue number, would be 800,000. All right, in order to achieve that operating profit, you'd have to create a difference in the COGS of the difference between the 490 that they recorded an operating profit and the 800,000 you think they should earn as an operating profit. And that would be an increase, would be a decrease in the COGS of 310,000. If the parent were paid 310,000 less, they would only receive $700,000. But the parent paid $1 million for that product from the third parties. This is just an example to show you that there are times when a cup, even though imperfect, might produce a much more realistic number than, say, a CPM. And in this case, particularly, even if you went back to the parent and said, all we're going to pay is the $1 million you paid to the third party, the parent is still much better off than dealing with an adjustment that would lower it down to 700,000. The U.S. is still not going to be earning enough profit to be in the range at that number. But what this is it demonstrates the fact that the lack of profitability is not related to the arm's length, the transfer price. The transfer price at $1 million is the lowest possible price it could be because that's what the parent paid third parties for it. Their lack of profitability is coming from some other problem, either low sales or other costs are running out of control. Thank you. I hope you found that example enlightening. If you like this video, please give us a like or give us some comments at the end of it, and have a great day.